Welcome to the Twin Labs podcast, where we help you make better decisions using AI and digital twins. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into the very architecture of choice. We are systematically breaking down the complex landscape of decision-making, focusing not just on, the external variables, but on the inherent psychological pitfalls, the cognitive limitations built right into our own operating systems.
That's right.
We are going to pair that necessary psychological understanding with the hard, structured methodologies designed explicitly to overcome those flaws.
And for any high-stakes business leaders and strategic thinkers out there, this deep dive is really a blueprint. It's about moving complex problems from, well, the murky, unreliable swamp of intuition.
Yeah, the gut feeling zone.
Exactly. And moving it into a defensible, high-quality, and ultimately auditable resolution. Our mission is explicitly practical. It's about institutionalizing decision rigor.
Okay, so where do we start?
We'll start with the internal cognitive architecture, popularized by Daniel Kahneman, the famous System 1 and System 2, and then move straight into the advanced systematic tools you need. We'll cover everything from, say, quantitative risk assessment using expected monetary value to the transparency of multi-criteria decision analysis, or MCDA.
So the goal is to help you move beyond just relying on that gut feeling.
Precisely. To move toward rational, explicit decision processes.
Okay, let's unpack this internal battle first. It feels like the foundation for understanding every mistake we make, even when we think we have all the information.
It is. The dual process model, developed by Kahneman and Avis Tversky, it gives us this incredible framework centered around two core cognitive systems.
System 1 and System 2.
Right. Think of System 1 as your brain's default operating mode. It is the speed demon, handling something like 98% of your daily cognition.
98%, wow.
Yeah. It's fast, automatic, effortless, and heavily influenced by emotion and, those infamous mental shortcuts we call heuristics.
So when you hear a sudden noise and immediately jump, or you can just read a road sign without consciously sounding out the letters.
That's pure System 1. It's incredibly efficient, but it's also prone to systematic error.
And System 2 is the exact opposite. This is the deliberate analyst, the careful accountant.
That's a great way to put it. It's slow, it requires conscious, draining effort, and it's the only truly logical part of the brain.
Like calculating a 15% tip on a complex bill in your head, or...
Or forcing yourself to analyze a foreign contract written in dense legal terms.
Yeah.
That demanding conscious evaluation, that is System 2 at work.
So this creates a core conflict then.
A huge one. System 1 is optimized for immediate present moment responses. It's a survival mechanism, really, optimized for short-term gain or avoiding immediate harm.
But System 2?
System 2, however, is the system crucial for reasoned, strategic foresight, for long-term planning and weighing complex consequences.
And when the fast, intuitive responses of System 1 override the slow, necessary deliberation of System 2, which happens a lot, I imagine, because deliberation is just exhausting.
It happens all the time. And that internal conflict immediately threatens long-term organizational value.
I think this is where it gets truly insightful, looking at the revised views of this theory, what some people call the dual process model 2.0.
Yeah.
The traditional view sometimes paints System 1 as inherently flawed, almost like it's always the villain. But the revision suggests intuition isn't always irrational.
And that's a massive relief for experienced professionals, right? The new view posits that for true domain experts, a seasoned pilot, an expert financial trader, a CEO with 30 years in one industry, that System 1 intuition can become highly accurate.
Why is that?
Because it's backed by deeply encoded non-conscious knowledge. This high-level intuition can generate responses that are both intuitive and logical, without needing that agonizingly slow validation from System 2.
So the challenge isn't intuition itself. The challenge arises from what they call cognitive conflict.
Yes. This is where heuristic intuitions, the quick shortcuts leading to bias, clash with the logical intuitions that are derived from real expertise.
And if the strengths of those two intuitions are similar?
That's your brain signaling. Stop. Engage System 2. It's a call for conscious deliberation.
But what if one is much stronger?
That's the danger. When the heuristic intuition, say, a strong emotional reaction to a market dip is too strong, System 2 might not engage for analysis. It might just engage to rationalize the bad, rushed choice the System 1 already made.
So it becomes a defense attorney for a bad decision.
Exactly. And that rationalization step is the cognitive failure that executives absolutely need to guard against.
And that failure state brings us directly to the decision pathologies, the predictable ways that System 2 tends to, go offline under pressure?
The main reason System 2 goes offline is cognitive overload. Plain and simple. Stress, excessive time pressure, or just having too many processing demands. It all systematically shifts control back to System 1.
So when your cognitive resources are constrained, you just default.
You default to reliance on mental shortcuts and systematic errors. We see this play out constantly in high-stress operational environments.
Are there studies on this?
Absolutely. There are famous studies showing that judges nearing lunchtime, or who have been processing cases all morning, are significantly more likely to revert to simpler, negative decisions.
Because they just lack the mental energy for complex analysis.
Precisely. They're depleted.
And a related but separate issue here is decision fatigue. This isn't just about general stress, right?
No, it's specific. It's when a sizable amount of continuous decision-making causes a decline in your decision skills.
And it leads to two primary failures that we see executives fall victim to. The first is impulsive decisions.
Right. You're cognitively drained, you're tired of analyzing, so you simply act and don't think. You just rush to closure to get it off your plate.
And the second failure.
The second is decision avoidance. This is often mistaken for simple procrastination, but it's different. You evade the situation entirely by consciously refusing to commit or make a choice.
You just punt it down the line or onto a subordinate.
Exactly. It's a self-preservation response to cognitive depletion. It's distinct from analysis paralysis, which is defined by continually looking at the decisions but being unable to move forward.
Okay, so analysis paralysis is a huge organizational cost. The inability to finalize a choice because you're overanalyzing or just drowning in information.
And the sources detail three very distinct flavors of this. Identifying which one you're dealing with is crucial for management.
What's the first one?
The first is analysis process paralysis. Imagine a legal team stuck on a contract review.
Okay.
They aren't looking for new facts. They're stuck in a loop of re-reviewing the same information again and again, terrified of missing some subtle risk. They get bogged down in the procedure.
It becomes cyclically, self-defeatingly cautious.
Perfectly put. Then there is decision precision paralysis. This often happens in product development or engineering specs.
How is that different?
Instead of re-reviewing known facts, the decision maker endlessly seeks new questions or new marginally useful information. They're exploring further and further peripheral possibilities.
Moving laterally, constantly refining criteria or seeking a tiny 0.1% improvement instead of just committing to what's already a good enough solution.
You got it. And finally, there's risk uncertainty paralysis. This is often linked to major geopolitical shifts or big supply chain decisions.
The decision maker wants to eliminate all uncertainty.
All of it. They're waiting for clarity on global trade policy or the perfect competitor assessment. But the information naturally can't provide that. They're waiting for a perfect, 100% certain solution that just doesn't exist in the real world.
Which prevents them from acting under conditions of real-world risk.
And then conversely, you have the dramatic failure of extinction by instinct.
The exact opposite extreme.
Yes. Making careless, rash decisions without any detailed planning or systematic process at all. This happens when a leader or a team relies solely on that flawed, unvalidated System 1 heuristic.
And the prescription for extinction by instinct is always implementing a structural system, the very thing we're discussing today.
But it's a tightrope walk. If you implement too much structure without proper scoping, you risk swinging back the other way.
Into one of those three flavors of analysis paralysis.
Precisely. The true key is establishing just enough rigor to enforce System 2 analysis without inducing information overload.
Now that we understand how the systems operate, we need to understand why we deviate from rational choice when things like money, risk, and emotions get involved.
Yeah.
And this is the domain of prospect theory.
Which completely revolutionized behavioral economics and business strategy.
Right. Before prospect theory, the dominant model was expected utility theory, EUT, which assumed people were just purely rational actors maximizing outcomes.
A very neat and tidy, but ultimately incorrect, model of human behavior. Prospect theory, introduced by Kahneman and Tversky, showed that real-world choices deviate consistently and predictably.
Because of profound psychological biases related to how we perceive gains and losses.
Yes. And it centers on three major behavioral phenomena. The first is reference dependence.
This one really surprised me. It teaches us that value isn't based on absolute wealth or absolute happiness, but is assessed relative to a neutral reference point.
And that reference point is usually your current status quo. You define outcomes purely in terms of gains and losses from that point, not your total financial picture.
So if you earned $100,000 last year, earning $110,000 this year is perceived as a significant gain.
Even though your absolute wealth grew. But if you earned 110 last year and only 100 this year, that $10,000 dip, even if you're still very wealthy, is experienced as a painful loss.
Relative to that reference point.
Exactly.
And the second discovery, and this is maybe the most impactful for business strategy, is loss aversion.
Oh, this is critical. The psychological impact of a loss is significantly greater than the satisfaction of an equivalent gain. And this isn't just academic. It has a quantifiable ratio.
What's the ratio?
The data suggests that the typical psychological asymmetry for loss aversion is about 2 to 1. A loss feels approximately twice as painful as an equivalent gain feels pleasurable.
Twice as painful. Think about how that influences negotiation or pricing strategy.
It's everything. If a customer pays $100 for a subscription, offering a $10 refund doesn't feel nearly as good as requiring them to pay a $10 penalty feels bad.
So you have to frame everything in terms of the customer avoiding a loss.
You do. And this asymmetry is critical because it causes this highly irrational split in risk tolerance.
How so?
People become generally risk-averse regarding gains. They prefer a sure, smaller gain over a risky chance at a large one. But paradoxically, they become risk-seeking when facing potential losses.
Gambling desperately to avoid taking a certain smaller loss.
Yes. This is why projects that are failing so often receive continued funding. Executives gamble, hoping for a turnaround, just to avoid the sure loss of killing the project right now.
And finally, we have the framing effects.
This is pure System 1 hijacking System 2. The way information is linguistically presented profoundly alters the perceived risk, even if the underlying probability is mathematically identical.
The famous example is the disease survival scenario, right?
It is. Presenting a healthcare option with a 90% survival rate creates a gain frame. It feels reassuring, optimistic, and it leads people toward that stable choice.
But if you present the exact same procedure with a 10% death rate,
That creates a loss frame. It sounds alarming, it focuses you on the potential negative outcome, and it often pushes you toward a riskier alternative just to avoid that certain death rate.
the difference in framing, even though the statistical reality is identical, can completely flip a highly rational decision-maker's choice.
It's incredibly powerful. And these general deviations manifest as specific, persistent, and highly costly biases in organizational life. We have to recognize them to mitigate them.
Let's start with the one that leads to the greatest waste of capital, the sunk cost effect.
This is the inclination to continue pouring resources, money, time, personnel, into a project that is clearly failing, often years past its viable expiration date.
And it's driven purely by the psychological desire to justify prior irreversible spending.
Rather than admitting the loss, accepting the reference point has shifted, and cutting ties, it is a direct application of loss aversion, where the sunk cost itself acts as that painful reference point.
Then you have confirmation bias. This one is insidious.
It's the tendency to actively seek out, interpret, and pay attention only to information that confirms your pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses.
So if you think a competitor is weak, you will only read news articles that support that thesis. You'll just filter out anything that suggests their strength.
Right. And the counter strategy has to be structural. You have to demand the mandatory seeking of contradictory evidence.
Another related trap is anchoring and adjustment.
Yes. This means your judgment is unduly influenced by the initial piece of information, the anchor. It's often the first number thrown out in a negotiation or a budget meeting.
And you fail to adjust your subsequent evaluations far enough away from that starting point, even when compelling new data should justify a drastic shift.
You get stuck on that first number.
And finally, a bias particularly dangerous in the age of 247 news cycles: recency.
This is placing excessive attention or weight on the most recent data, the most viral event, or the vivid anecdote from last week, while forgetting or ignoring older, perhaps more statistically robust, data or long-term trends.
So if a minor recent security breach triggers a $10 million overhaul of an already secure system, ignoring 10 years of successful protocol,
That's recency bias at work.
we've painted System 1 as the source of all these errors, but it's vital to stress that emotion itself is not merely an impediment to rationality.
Not at all. Modern neuroscience, particularly through the somatic marker hypothesis, proves that emotions are crucial components of rational decision-making. They act as an internal, rapid compass.
This feels like a point of necessary friction. Doesn't the somatic marker hypothesis, SMH, essentially prove that the experienced CEO's gut instinct is a rational, distilled System 1 decision?
That is the core question.
So why should we enforce a slow, effortful System 2 process if their fast system is optimized by experience?
Well, the SMH suggests that past emotional outcomes create what are called somatic markers. These are visceral feelings, physiological changes, or bodily states that become rapidly and unconsciously associated with certain behavioral options, especially under high uncertainty.
So when a CEO faces a new, complex decision, say choosing between two acquisition targets with similar financials, their body might produce a subtle, non-conscious marker.
A marker related to a past, painful failure in a similar scenario. Precisely. These markers provide a rapid type 1 signal that guides you away from options that previously led to a negative emotional outcome, or toward those associated with positive feelings.
So it speeds up complex decision-making, bypassing the need for a full, slow System 2 analysis.
It does. However, and this is the critical caveat, this only works when the emotion is low intensity. High-intensity emotions, panic, extreme anger, intense greed, can activate the brain's limbic system and completely overwhelm the capacity for conscious, rational thought entirely. So the goal is not to eliminate markers, but to integrate their quick signal with measured logical reasoning.
That transition is perfect. We move from the internal psychological battlefield, where we know the human brain is prone to biases, to the external organizational structures designed to compensate and enforce System 2 rigor.
If we know we are flawed, we must rely on process integrity.
And the initial step for any high-quality decision, especially a complex one, has to be impeccable problem framing.
It sounds so obvious, but so many organizational failures stem from solving the wrong problem extremely well. Managers must define the problem meticulously and ensure all stakeholders agree on exactly what issue is being solved.
If the initial question is ill-formed, you are guaranteed to produce the wrong solution, no matter how complex your analysis is later.
It's the essential first defense against failure. And this structure must also extend to the human element through rigorous team structuring.
Meaning, you can't just leave the assignment of roles and methods to chance.
You can't. If roles and criteria definitions aren't explicitly structured, the process often just defaults to consensus.
Which feels harmonious, but is often a trap.
A huge trap. Consensus, if it's achieved through default mechanisms rather than critical interrogation, usually leads to a less thorough evaluation, and it inhibits high-quality, non-obvious solutions. We call this satisficing, accepting the first solution that is just good enough for the group.
So how do you prevent that?
Through rigorous administrative structuring, clarifying roles, establishing ground rules for dissent, and formalizing methods upfront. It's a crucial preventative measure against collective cognitive failure.
And to mandate this rigor, several systematic prescriptive models exist. They break complexity into sequential, auditable steps.
Two excellent examples that enforce comprehensiveness are the DECIDE and GOFER models. The DECIDE model, developed by Christina Guo, offers a straightforward 6-part sequence.
Okay, what are the steps?
D is for define the problem. E is establish criteria. C, consider all alternatives. I, identify the best alternative. D, develop and implement a plan. And finally, E, evaluate and monitor.
It's a comprehensive checklist.
It is, and the GOFER model, which comes from the work of psychologist Irving Janis, focuses heavily on exhaustive evaluation and exploring the consequence of inaction.
What does GOFER stand for?
G is for goals clarification. O is for options generation. F is for facts finding. E is for consideration of effects, weighing the consequences. And R is for review and implementation.
So these models basically serve as mandatory checklists. They force the System 2 engine to kick in by breaking the decision complexity into manageable chunks.
Exactly. They make the decision transparent, traceable, and systematic, rather than allowing that fast flow of System 1 to just take over.
When we talk about these organizational processes, we have to categorize the decisions being made. There's a fundamental distinction for senior leaders, isn't there?
Yes, between programmed and non-programmed decisions.
Programmed decisions being the routine, recurrent issues.
Handled by established, automated rules like triggering a reorder when stock dips below a certain level. They require minimal System 2 effort.
And non-programmed decisions are the complex ones. Unique situations, developing a new product line, entering a new market.
Responding to unprecedented risk. These require executive judgment, creativity, and systematic rigor. And they are absolutely pivotal for long-term organizational success and adaptability.
For those high-stakes, non-program decisions, especially those guiding long-term strategy, we use analytical tools like Pestle and SWOT.
Right. Pestle provides that crucial macro-environmental view: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. It sets the long-range external boundaries for the business.
Whereas SWOT strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats is more of an introspective, tactical snapshot focused on internal capabilities and immediate external factors.
Now, what is absolutely critical for high-quality strategic decision-making is the mandatory sequence in which you apply them.
You must use Pestle first.
Always.
That is a fascinating mandate. Why is the sequencing of Pestle before SWOT so crucial?
Because you have to anchor your strategy in the unchangeable macro reality first.
Hmm.
The Pestle factors say a new regulatory environment or a global recession define the operating environment, and they are largely beyond your control.
So only after establishing those macro constraints can SWOT accurately determine how your internal capacity
Video strengths and weaknesses.
can best capitalize on opportunities or mitigate threats within those predefined external forces.
Exactly. Failure to follow this sequence leads to strategies that might look great on paper, internally, but are completely unviable given the external economic or political landscape. It transforms the strategy from a general assessment into a truly context-dependent, defensible plan.
Let's move into the realm of the truly objective now. The quantitative tools that help us explicitly quantify uncertainty and resist that System 1 urge to simplify risk or rely on simple optimism.
This is where decision trees come in. They're phenomenal tools because they provide both a visualization and a quantification tool at the same time.
They're essentially flowcharts.
Right. They start with a decision point, and they branch out based on potential outcomes, costs, and consequences. They are particularly indispensable in operational planning, budgeting, and project management, where you can assign hard numbers to probabilities and costs.
And the core analytical strength of the decision tree is calculating the expected monetary value, or EMV.
Yes, EMV literally translates risk into financial terms by assigning a probability and a monetary value to every potential outcome.
So by comparing the total EMVs of different decision paths, you get an objective metric that just cuts right through emotional biases like optimism or loss aversion.
And the simple formula is expected value equals outcome 1 multiplied by likelihood 1 plus outcome 2 multiplied by likelihood 2, and so on, minus the initial cost of the decision. This is how you formalize risk quantification.
Let's use a more complex example, maybe something beyond a simple renovation cost, to show how this applies to strategic risk. Say a tech firm is deciding whether to launch a new, unproven product line.
Okay.
Let's call it option A.
Okay, option A. And the alternative is sticking with updating an existing reliable product, which is option B.
Right.
So for option A, the new product launch, the costs are high. Let's say $5 million in initial investment. But the potential revenue is volatile.
So you'd have different scenarios.
Exactly. Scenario 1, massive success with revenue of $20 million, but the probability is only, say, 20%.
Okay.
Scenario 2, moderate success with $8 million in revenue at a 50% probability. And scenario 3, market failure with only $1 million in revenue at a 30% probability.
Okay, so our EMV calculation for option A would be 20 million times 0.2 plus 8 million times 0.5 plus 1 million times 0.3. And then subtract the $5 million initial cost.
Right. So that's $4 million plus another $4 million plus $300,000. That's $8.3 million in expected revenue.
Subtracting the $5 million cost gives a net EMV of $3.3 million for the risky new launch.
Now, compare that to option B, the existing product update. The initial cost is lower, say $1 million. The outcome is less volatile, but it's also capped.
So what are the scenarios for that one?
Let's say scenario 1. Moderate gain with $3 million in revenue at a 70% probability. And scenario 2, low gain with $1.5 million in revenue at a 30% probability.
The EMV for option B would be 3 million times 0.7 plus 1.5 million times 0.3 minus the $1 million cost.
So it's 2.1 million plus 450,000, which is 2.5 million in expected revenue.
Subtracting the 1 million cost gives a net EMV of 1.55 million.
So in this comparison, the new, riskier product, option A, has an objective EMV that is more than double the safer option.
And without this rigorous calculation, a team prone to loss aversion might have avoided that $5 million initial investment, missing out on the superior expected financial value.
Absolutely. These rigorous analytical tools are essential for formal risk quantification, forming the basis for the structured decision-making processes emphasized by twin labs.
While decision trees handle quantitative uncertainty beautifully, what happens when the criteria are complex, conflicting, or qualitative? We know real-world choices rarely rely only on expected profit.
No, they don't. And that's where multi-criteria decision analysis, or MCDA, becomes indispensable.
So what is MCDA designed for?
It's designed to provide structure and transparency for complex dilemmas that involve unavoidable trade-offs between criteria. For example, balancing initial cost against long-term performance, environmental impact, and social acceptability for a major infrastructure project.
It's the tool of choice when objectives conflict.
It is. And the process itself is what enforces that System 2 rigor by systematically evaluating the alternative.
Yeah.
There are a few non-negotiable stages.
What are they?
First, you must identify the criteria, all the relevant objectives and concerns, and you have to incorporate diverse stakeholder input to make sure your coverage is comprehensive.
Okay.
Second, and this is the most critical part, you determine criteria weights to reflect their relative importance. This is often where subjectivity enters, through methods like swing weighting or direct ranking.
And then?
Third, you measure the alternative's performance against those criteria, often using standardized scores. And finally, you conduct the scoring and weighting to rank the options based on their aggregated performance.
Now, the MCDA process, because it starts with those subjective inputs, the criteria weights, it requires a final critical step to ensure the result is trustworthy. What is that non-negotiable final step?
That mandatory final step is sensitivity analysis. This is where you deliberately test the robustness of your final ranking against variations in those initial subjective inputs.
So you change the weights to see what happens.
Exactly. If you assigned environmental impact a weight of 30%, you test what happens to the final ranking if you lower that weight to 15% or raise it to 45%.
So if that small variation causes the preferred option A to suddenly drop to third place, what does that tell the decision maker?
It tells them their decision is fundamentally unstable. It means the preference for option A hinges entirely on the exact specific weight they subjectively gave to that single criterion.
But if the ranking stays constant, even when the weights are wildly varied,
Then the decision is robust, defensible, and reliable. This rigorous testing minimizes the influence of confirmation bias on the final output. MCDA's ability to integrate diverse viewpoints and illuminate trade-offs is crucial for complex organizational choices. This systematic, transparent approach is precisely the kind of methodology Twin Labs helps decision-makers implement for optimal outcomes.
we've covered individual limitations and the tools to fix them. Now we move to arguably the greatest threat to high-quality organizational decisions: the collective cognitive failure known as groupthink.
Groupthink. The insidious phenomenon where the collective desire for consensus, unity, and harmony just overrides critical thinking and the realistic appraisal of alternatives.
It's a pathology of group dynamics that destroys intellectual diversity and rigor. What are the conditions that make a group vulnerable to it?
Well, Irving Janis identified 3 antecedent conditions. High group cohesiveness is a major factor, but cohesiveness alone isn't necessarily bad.
Okay, so it's not just about everyone being friends.
No. Groupthink only erupts if that high cohesiveness is coupled with structural faults like group insulation, highly homogeneous membership, or a lack of impartial leadership, or a provocative situational context like extremely high stress or urgency.
And the symptoms are terrifyingly consistent because they're driven by collective bias. Janis organized them into categories, starting with the overestimation of the group.
Right. This involves illusions of invulnerability, just excessive optimism that encourages massive, unchecked risk-taking and an unquestioned belief in the group's morality.
Which allows members to ignore the ethical or negative consequences of their decisions because the group must be right.
Exactly. The second category is closed-mindedness. This is characterized by collective rationalization, where warnings that challenge the group's shared assumptions are quickly dismissed or ignored.
And stereotyping opponents.
Yes, painting any external dissenting voice or competitor as weak, stupid, or evil, thereby removing any need to take their actions or warnings seriously.
And the third type, pressures toward uniformity, includes the key personal failures: self-censorship,
Where individuals just minimize their own doubts to avoid conflict.
and the dangerous illusion of unanimity.
This is a big one. This is where silence from dissenting members is misread as consent, leading the entire group to believe everyone agrees, when in reality, people are just self-censoring to maintain their group status.
The Bay of Pigs invasion is the classic historical case study Janis used.
It is. President Kennedy's inner circle was highly cohesive and insulated. They uncritically accepted the CIA's faulty plan, driven by that illusion of invulnerability.
And crucially, dissenting voices like Arthur Schlesinger Jr. later admitted they just minimized their own doubts to avoid conflict.
They did. They stereotyped the opposition, Fidel Castro, as having little support, and they failed to question false assumptions about the Cuban army's weakness. The unity was prioritized over national security.
And the tragic cost of this is perfectly illustrated by the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster.
Yes. The launch was rushed due to enormous external political and publicity pressure. The inclusion of the civilian teacher, Krista McAuliffe, created a self-imposed schedule for maximum public impact.
And the NASA teams demonstrated collective rationalization and the illusion of invulnerability.
They chose to proceed despite repeated warnings from engineers regarding how cooler temperatures affected the O-ring's reliability. The organizational desire to meet the schedule overrode critical engineering judgment, illustrating a system-wide failure to question assumptions.
The good news is that these pathologies are preventable.
They are. And the fix lies in institutionalizing dissent. The critical example is that the Cuban Missile Crisis, just 1 year after the Bay of Pigs, saw Kennedy's team successfully apply preventative measures.
And the leader has to consciously mitigate their own influence.
Absolutely. The leader must assign every member the explicit role of critical evaluator and deliberately avoid expressing an initial opinion when assigning the task. The leader should also sometimes absent themselves from key deliberation meetings.
To mitigate their excessive gravitational influence on the group's direction.
Exactly. Beyond the leader, you must mandate structured dissent. This is non-optional. You must implement the formal devil's advocate role, and not a rotating role, but a specifically appointed member whose only task is to provide questions and insights that explicitly contradict the majority view.
Forcing a rigorous examination of alternatives.
Right. And they must break down that insulation barrier. Organizations have to require groups to seek external checks discussing ideas with trusted outsiders, inviting external experts to challenge internal assumptions, especially on technical or political risks.
And diversity is key.
It is proven that diversity in backgrounds, experience, and thought is instrumental in prevention, as diverse teams are less likely to share the same unchallenged assumptions.
Beyond just mitigating biases, organizations need structured methods to manage and capture diverse stakeholder input without falling prey to typical group dynamics.
This is where we use techniques like the nominal group technique and the Delphi technique.
Let's start with the nominal group technique, or NGT. This involves face-to-face small group interaction, but with highly structured constraints.
The steps are silent idea generation, which prevents vocal members from dominating, then a round-robin presentation, a clarification phase, and then confidential voting or ranking.
So what's the advantage of NGT?
Speed and engagement. You get quick, democratic results within hours, and it's excellent for exploring initial ideas or engaging lay people who prefer face-to-face settings where ideas are built upon quickly.
And in contrast, you have the Delphi technique,
which uses a multi-stage, self-completed questionnaire process, and it preserves participant anonymity throughout. Participants receive individual feedback after each round, showing them the aggregated median group rating, and then they're asked to re-rate items.
The big advantage there is anonymity.
Total anonymity. It can involve larger groups of geographically dispersed experts, and because it relies on anonymity, it completely eliminates the pressure to conform or self-censor. It is ideal for developing authoritative guidelines or defining complex criteria, though it typically takes weeks or months to conclude.
And these structured consensus methods ensure that diverse perspectives are captured and biases are minimized before inputs are finalized for quantitative models.
Yes, and Twin Labs emphasizes integrating this structured input, the qualitative assessment of criteria and probabilities, with rigorous analytical processes like MCDA.
We've reached the final crucial stage, operationalizing these insights to optimize future decision quality. The goal here is systematic, institutionalized improvement.
The most fundamental mechanism for strategic debiasing, this links all our themes today, is metacognition and decoupling.
Decoupling, what does that mean?
It's the intentional, deliberate disengagement from fast, intuitive System 1 judgments to enforce the slow, effortful System 2 analysis. It's an explicit executive override function where the decision-maker must pause and verify their initial impression, especially if the decision is high stakes.
A popular technique used for forced decoupling is the premortem.
An excellent tool,
Before the decision is made, the team imagines that the project has failed spectacularly a year from now, and they have to write down all the reasons why.
This forces System 2 to search for the weaknesses and risks that confirmation bias would typically just filter out.
And to measure the success of this decoupling, we have to neutralize the highly common outcome bias. We have to stop judging the quality of a past decision solely by its eventual financial or operational result.
Because a great process can lead to a bad outcome due to unpredictable luck.
And a terrible process can lead to a good outcome purely by chance.
So we need a process audit framework that evaluates the quality of the process utilized, independent of the result.
Exactly. Did we adhere to the decided criteria? Was MCDA performed? Was the devil's advocate role enforced? This focuses on procedural adherence and defensibility, ensuring that future decisions benefit from lessons learned, regardless of whether the last decision was lucky or unlucky.
So what are the key recommendations for organizations looking to institutionalize this kind of rigor?
Our key recommendations start with the environment itself. Prioritize environmental control. You have to actively reduce unnecessary cognitive load, stress, and time pressure.
Because stress and urgency activate System 1 bias.
So allocating sufficient unconstrained time for deliberation is the most fundamental step for enabling high-quality strategic thought.
Second, mandate structured data acquisition.
Yes. Require a formal search for contradictory evidence, specifically aimed at fighting confirmation bias. If you are assessing a new market, you must force the analyst to spend 25% of their time finding reasons not to enter it.
And third,
Always ensure transparency and alignment. Complex, high-stakes decisions require a dual approach. Leveraging rational methodology like decision trees and MCDA for objective assessment, alongside a deep psychological awareness of your System 1 limitations and active groupthink prevention strategies.
by embedding these protocols, organizations partnering with Twin Labs don't just make better one-off decisions.
No, they create a pervasive culture where disciplined analysis is rewarded and executive judgment is supported by a traceable, auditable structure.
Leading to consistently justifiable and defensible choices. What a necessary and comprehensive exploration today. We've explored the internal paradoxes of the human mind, from the quantified pain of loss aversion to the collective chaos of groupthink.
And then detailed exactly how disciplined structure, whether it's visualizing possibilities with expected monetary value or managing group dynamics with the Delphi technique, is the necessary counterweight to our innate cognitive limitations.
Right.
And remember, improvement starts not with the impossible task of eliminating emotion or intuition, but with the disciplined regulation and integration of those signals using the methodical rigor of System 2.
So the most powerful strategic decisions are those that are both intentional and meticulously structured.
Moving from that simple, intuitive reliance to an auditable, defensible rationale. The future of decision-making lies in using these systematic tools to enhance rather than replace human judgment.
And our mission at Twin Labs is always to empower you to navigate complexity and achieve that strategic foresight.
Thank you for joining us today. Visit the Twin Labs website for more business insights.